That was cool. So it does an intro video now. That's neat. So I was gonna show you this book again. Let me change my thing. I keep trying over and over and failing. Allow me. Um, and then this background picture I put up because this is from Scotland. That's the like a fairy circle that was there. There's also some other ones. Let me see. I'll just put them up real quick. This one was from the fairy pools in Scotland. Um, and there's just a moss. There's some cool moss. And there's a bluebell. So there's the fairy thing. But I'm gonna read this book finally through the intro again, called The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. I don't know if Jacob approves because it's about a guy who got killed by demons on a fairy hill, in his words. But I finally got to the essay part through the intro, so I'm gonna try to just see what it says. And people are welcome to join in if they want to, but hopefully I'll just get through it. So I want to read it again. So The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, an essay of the nature and actions of the subterranean and, for the most part, invisible people, heretofore going under the name of elves, fauns, and fairies, or the like, among the Low Country Scots, as they are described by those who have a second sight. And now, to occasion further inquiry, collected and compared by a circumspect inquirer residing among the Scottish Irish in Scotland, Secret Commonwealth, or a treatise displaying the chief curiosities as they are in use among the diverse people of Scotland to this day, singularities for the most part peculiar to that nation, a subject not heretofore disclosed of by any of our writers, and yet ventured on in an essay to suppress the impudent and growing atheism of this age, and to satisfy the desire of some choice friends. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine. An image was before mine eyes. Job 4:15 and 16. This is a rebellious people, which say to these seers, which say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, but smooth things. Isaiah 39 through 10. And the man whose eyes were opened hath said, Numbers 24:15. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. 1 Corinthians 13:12. It doth not appear yet what we shall be, but we shall be like God and see him as he is. 1 John 3:2. Shall the dead be born under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof? Job 26:5. Chapter 1 of the subterranean inhabitants. The Ceits, or fairies, as they call slaymates, or the good people, it would seem, to prevent the dint of their ill attempts, for the Irish used to bless all they fear of harm, and are said to be of a middle nature betwixt man and angel, as were daemons thought to be of old, of intelligent studious spirits, and light changeable bodies, like those called astral, somewhat of the nature of a condensed cloud, and best seen in twilight. These bodies be so pliable, thorough, and subtly of the spirits that agitate them, that they can make them appear or disappear at pleasure. Some have bodies or vehicles so spongious, thin, and delicate that they are fed by only sucking into some fine spirituous liquors that pierce like pure air and oil. Others feed more gross on the poison or substance of corns and liquors, or corn itself that grows on the surface of the earth, which these fairies steal away, partly invisible, partly preying on the grain, as do crows and mice. Wherefore, in this same age, they are sometimes heard to bake bread, strike hammers, and do such like services within the little hillocks they most haunt. Some whereof of old, before the gospel dispelled paganism, and in some barbarous places as yet, enter houses after all are at rest, and set the kitchens in order, cleansing all the vessels. Such dregs go under the name of brownies. When we have plenty, they have scarcity at their homes, and on the contrary, for they are empowered to catch as much prey everywhere as they please. Their robberies, notwithstanding, ofttimes occasion great ricks of corn not to bleed so well, as they call it, or prove so copious by very far as was expected by their owner. I don't really know what I just read. Their bodies of congealed air are sometimes carried aloft, other whiles grovel in different shapes and enter into any cranny or cleft of the earth where air enters, to their ordinary dwellings, the earth being full of cavities and cells, and there being no place nor creature but is supposed to have other animals, greater or lesser, living in upon it as inhabitants, and no such thing as a pure wilderness in the whole universe. We then, the more terrestrial kind, have now so numerously planted all countries, do labor, we then do labor for that abstruse people, as well as for ourselves, albeit when several countries were uninhabited by us, these had their easy tillage above ground, as we now. The print of those furrows do yet remain to be seen on the shoulders of very high hills, which was done when the champaign ground was wood and forest. They removed to other lodgings at the beginning of each quarter of the year, so traversing till doomsday, being impatient of staying in one place, and finding some ease by sojourning and changing habitations. Their chameleon-like bodies swim in the air near the earth with bag and baggage, and at such revolution of time, seers or men of the second sight, females being seldom so qualified, have very terrifying encounters with them, even on highways, who therefore usually shun to travel abroad at these 4 seasons of the year, and thereby have made it a custom to this day among the Scottish Irish to keep church duly every first Sunday of the quarter, to seine or hollow themselves, their corns and cattle, from the shots and stealth of these wandering tribes. And many of these superstitious people will not be seen in church again until the next quarter begin, as if no duty were to be learned or done by them, but all the use of worship and sermons were to save them from these arrows that fly in the dark. They are distributed in tribes and orders, and have children, nurses, marriages, deaths, and burials in appearance as we, unless they so do for a mock show, or to prognosticate some such things among us. They are clearly seen by these men of the second sight to eat at funeral banquets, hence many of the Scottish Irish will not taste meat at these meetings, lest they have communion with or be poisoned by them. Some are seen to carry the bier or coffin with the corpse among the Middle Earth men to the grave. Some men of that exalted sight, whether by art or nature, have told me they have seen at these meetings a double man, or the shape of some man in two places, that is, a subterranean, a superterranean, and a subterranean inhabitant, perfectly resembling one another in all points, whom he, notwithstanding, could easily distinguish one from another by some secret tokens or operations, and so go speak to the man, his neighbor or and familiar, passing by the apparition or resemblance of him. They avouch that every element in different state of being have animals resembling these of other element, as there be fishes sometimes at sea resembling monks of the late order in all their hoods and dresses. So as the Roman intention of good and bad daemons and guardian angels particularly assigned is called by them an ignorant mistake, sprung only from this original. They call this reflex man a co-walker, every way like the man, as a twin brother and companion, haunting him as his shadow, as is oft seen known among and resembling the original, both before and after the original is dead, and was also seen of old to enter a house, by which the people knew that the person of that likeness was to visit them within a few days. This copy, echo, or living picture goes at last to his own herd. It accompanied that person so long and frequently for ends best known to itself, whether to guard him from the secret assaults of some of its own folks, or only as a sportful ape to counterfeit all his actions. However, the stories of old witches prove beyond contradiction that all sorts of people, spirits which assume light airy bodies, or crazed bodies coacted by foreign spirits, seem to have some pleasure, at least to assuage from pain or melancholy by frisking and capering like satyrs, or whistling and screeching like unlucky birds in their unhallowed synagogues and Sabbaths. If invited and earnestly required, these companions make themselves known and familiar to men, otherwise being in a different state and element, they neither can nor will easily converse with them. They avouch that a halloo or great eater hath a voracious elf to be his attender, called a joint eater or a just haver, feeding on the pith or quintessence of what the man eats, and that therefore he continues to lean like a hawk or heron, notwithstanding his devouring appetite. Yet it would seem that they convey that substance elsewhere, for these subterraneans eat but little in their dwellings, their food being exactly clean and served up by pleasant children like enchanted puppets. What food they extract from us is conveyed to their homes by secret paths, as some skilful women do the pith and milk from their neighbors' cows into their own cheese hold through a hair tether at a great distance by art magic, or by drawing a spigot fastened to a post, which will bring milk as far off as a bull will be heard to roar. The cheese made of the remaining milk of a cow thus strained will swim in water like a cork. The method they take to recover their milk is a bitter chiding of the suspected enchanters, charging them by a counter charm to give them back to their own in God or their master's name. But a little of mother's dung stroked on the calf's mouth before it suck any does prevent this theft. Okay. But a little of the mother's dung stroked on the calf's mouth before it suck any does prevent this theft. All right, let's see. Their houses are called large and fair, and unless at some odd occasions unperceivable by vulgar eyes, the Ratchland and other enchanted islands have fir lights, continual lamps, and fires, often seen without fuel to sustain them. Women are yet alive who tell they were taken away when the child bed to nurse fairy children. Okay, women are yet alive who tell they were taken away when in childbed to nurse fairy children, a lingering, voracious image of their being left in their place, like their reflection in a mirror, which, as if it were some insatiable spirit in an assumed body, made first semblance to devour the meats that it cunningly carried by, and then left the carcass as if it expired and departed thence by a natural or in common death. The child and fire, with food and other necessities, are set before the nurse how soon she enters, but she neither perceives any passage out, nor sees what those people do in other rooms of the lodging. When the child is weaned, the nurse dies, or is conveyed back, or gets it to her choice to stay there. But if any superterraneans be so subtle as to practice sleights for procuring a privacy to any of their mysteries, such as making use of their ointments, which as Gyges's ring makes them invisible or nimble, or casts them into a trance, or alters their shape, or makes things appear at a vast distance, etc. That was all in parentheses. But if any superterranean people be so subtle as to practice sleights for procuring privacy to any of their mysteries, they smite them without pain, as with a puff of wind, and bereave them of both the natural and acquired sights in the twinkling of an eye. Both these sights, where once they come, being in the same organ and inseparable, or they strike them dumb. The Tramontanes, I don't know what the word. The Tramontanes to this day put bread, the Bible, or a piece of iron in women's beds when traveling to save them from being thus stolen, and they commonly report that all uncouth, unknown whites are terrified by nothing earthly so much as by cold iron. They deliver the reason to be that hell lying betwixt the chill tempest and the firebrands of scalding metals and iron of the north. Hence the lodestone causes a tendency to that point. By an antipathy thereto, these odious far-scented creatures shrug in fright at all that comes thence relating to so abhorred a place, whence their torment is either begun or feared to come after. So that's saying that basically that's saying that the reason he thinks the reason fairies or the subterranean people hate iron is because it reminds them of basically hell. The blacksmith place reminds them of hell. Their apparel and speech is like that of the people and country under which they live. So are they seen to wear plaids and variegated garments in the highlands of Scotland, and sunnocs thereof in Ireland. They speak but little, and that by way of whistling, clear, not rough. They speak but little, and that by way of whistling, clear, not rough. The very devils conjured in any country do answer in the language of the place, yet sometimes the subterraneans speak more distinctly than at other times. Their women are said to spin very fine, to dye, to tissue, to embroider, but whether it is as manual operation of substantial refined stuffs with apt and solid instruments, or only curious cobwebs, impalpable rainbows, and a fantastic imagination of the actions of more terrestrial mortals, since it transcended all the senses of the seer to discern whether I leave to conjecture as I found it. That's interesting. All right, their men travel abroad, either presaging or aping the dismal and tragical actions of some amongst us, and have also many disastrous doings of their own, as convocations, fighting, gashes, wounds, and burials, both in the earth and air. They live much longer than we, yet die at last, or vanish from the state. 'Tis one of their tenets that nothing perisheth, but as the sun and year, everything goes in a circle, lesser or greater, and is renewed and refreshed in its revolutions. As 'tis another, that everybody in the creation moves, which is a sort of life, and that nothing moves, but has another animal moving on it, and so on, to the utmost minutest corpuscle that's capable to be a receptacle of life. They are said to have aristocratical rulers and laws, but no discernible religion, love, or devotion towards God, the blessed Maker of all. They disappear whenever they hear his name invoked, or the name of Jesus, at which all do bow willingly, or by constraint, that dwell above or beneath within the earth. Philippians 2:10. Nor can they act aught at that time after hearing that of that sacred name. The Tabhazer or seer that corresponds with this kind of familiars can bring them with a spell to appear to himself or others when he pleases, as readily as Endor witch, or to those of her kind. He tells that they are ever readiest to go on hurtful errands, but seldom will the messengers of great good to men but seldom will be the messengers of great good to men. He is not terrified with their sight when he calls them, but seeing them in a surprise, as often he does, frights him extremely, and glad would he be quite of such, for the hideous spectacle seen among them, as the torturing of some wight, earnest, ghostly, staring looks, skirmishes, and the like. They do not all the harm which appearingly they do have power to do, nor are they perceived to be in great pain, save that they are usually silent and sullen. They are said to have many pleasant toyish books, but the operation of these pieces only appears in some paroxysms of antic corybantic jollity, as if ravished and prompted by by a new spirit entering into them at that instant, lighter and merrier than their own. Other books they have Other books they have of involved abstruse sense, much like the Rosicrucian style. They have nothing of the Bible, save collected parcels for charms and counter charms, not to defend themselves withal, but to operate on other animals. For they are a people invulnerable by our weapons, and albeit werewolves and witches, true bodies are. By the union of the spirit of nature that runs through all, echoing and doubling the blows toward another. That's in parentheses. By the union of the spirit of nature that runs through all, echoing and doubling the blow towards another. And I'll start over without that thing in parentheses. For they are a people invulnerable by our weapons, and albeit werewolves and witches, true bodies are wounded at home when the astral assumed bodies are stricken elsewhere, as the strings of a second harp tuned to a unison sounds, though only one be struck. Yet these people have not a second, or so gross a body at all, to be so pierced, but as air, which when divided units again, or if they feel pain by a blow, they are better physicians than we, and quickly cure it. They are not subject to sore sickness, but dwindle and decay at a certain period, all about one age. Some say their continual sadness is because of their pendulous state, like those men, Luke 13:26, as uncertain what at last revolution will become of them, when they are locked up into an unchangeable condition, and if they have any frolic fits of mirth, 'tis as the constrained grinning of a morthead, or rather as acted on a stage, and moved by another, than cordially coming of themselves. But other men of the second sight, being illiterate and unwary in their observations, learn from those one averring of subterranean people to the departed souls, attending a while in this inferior state, and clothed with bodies procured through their alms deeds in this life, fluid, active, ethereal vehicles to hold them, that they may not scatter or wander or be lost in the totem or their first nothing. But if any were so impious, impious as to have given no alms, they say, when the souls of such do depart, they sleep in an inactive state till they resume the terrestrial bodies again. Others, that what the Low Country Scots calls a wreath, and the Irish Tavesey, or Death's messenger, appearing sometimes as a little rough dog, and if crossed or conjured in a time, will be pacified by the death of any other creature instead of the sick man, is only exuvious fumes of the man approaching death, exhaled and congealed into various likeness, as ships and armies are sometimes shaped in the air, and called astral bodies, agitated as wildfire with wind, and are neither souls or counterfeiting spirits, yet not a few avouch, as is said, that surely these are a numerous people by themselves, having their own polities. I don't know if it says politics. There's some like spelling errors in here too. I'm not sure. Which diversities of judgments may occasion several inconsistencies in this rehearsal after the narrowest scrutiny made about it. Their weapons are most what what solid earthly bodies, nothing of iron, but much of stone, like to yellow soft flints, shaped like a barbed arrowhead, but flung like a dart with great force. These arms, cut by art and tool, it seems beyond human, have somewhat of the nature of thunderbolt, subtly and mortally wounding the vital parts without breaking the skin, of which wounds I have observed in beasts and felt them in my hands. They are not as infallible Benjamites, hitting as a hair's breadth, nor are they wholly invanquishable, at least in appearance. The men of that second sight do not discover strange things when asked, but at fits and raptures, as if inspired with some genius at that instant, which before did lurk in or about them. Thus I have frequently spoke to one of them, who in his transport told he cut the body of one of these people in two with his iron weapon, and so escaped this onset. Yet he saw nothing left behind of that appearing divided body. At other times he out-wrestled some of them. His neighbors often perceived this man to disappear at a certain place, and about 1 hour after to become visible and discover himself near a bow-shot from the first place. It was in that place where he became invisible, said he, that the subterraneans did encounter him and combat with him. Those who are unseen or unsanctified, called Fae, are said to be pierced or wounded with those people's weapons, which make them do somewhat very unlike their former practice, causing a sudden alteration, yet the cause thereof imperceivable at present. Nor have they power, either they cannot make use of their natural powers, or ask not the heavenly aid, to escape the blow impending. A man of the second sight perceived a person standing by him, found others to view, wholly gored in blood, and he, amazed like, bid him instantly flee, bid him instantly flee. The whole man laughed at his art and warning, since there was no appearance of danger. He had scarce contracted his lips from laughter, when unexpectedly his enemy leapt in at his side and stabbed him with their weapons. They also pierced cows or other animals, usually said to be elf shot, whose purest substance, if they die, these subterraneans take to live on, viz., the aerial and ethereal parts, the most spirituous matter for prolonging of life, such as aquavitae, moderately taken, is among liquors, leaving the terrestrial behind. The cure of such hurts is only for a man to find out the whole with his finger, as if the spirits flowing from a man's warm hand were antidote sufficient against their poisoned darts. Oh, thanks, John God, for correcting. I didn't know what that word was. Polity, noun, plural noun. Politiza, form for the process of civil government or constitution. The civic humans polity, an organized society, a state of political entity. Well, thanks. That helps. Also, I don't know how much more there is. Looks like there's quite a bit, but I'll at least get to the end of this part. 9. As birds and beasts whose bodies are much used to the change of the free and open air foresee storms, so those invisible people are more sagacious to understand by the books of nature things to come than we who are pestered with the grosser dregs of all elementary mixtures and have our pure spirits choked by them. The deer scents out a man in powder, though a late invention, at a great distance. A hungry hunter, bred, and the raven, a carrion. The deer scents out man in powder, at a great distance. A hungry hunter, bred, and the raven, a carrion. Their brains being long clarified by the high and subtle air, will observe a very small change in a trice. Thus a man of the second sight, perceiving the operations of these forecasting invisible people among us, indulged through the stupendous providence to give warnings of some remarkable events, either in the air, earth, or waters. Told he saw a winding shroud creeping on a walking heathful person's legs till it came to the knee, and afterwards it came up to the middle, then to the shoulders, and at last over the head, which was visible to no other person. And by observing the spaces of time betwixt the several stages, he easily guessed how long the man was to live who wore the shroud. For when it approached his head, he told that person was ripe for the grave. I've actually heard of that in some Protestant churches happening. There be many places called fairy hills, which the mountain people think impious and dangerous to peel or discover by taking earth or wood from them, superstitiously believing the souls of their predecessors to dwell there. And for that end, say they, a moat or mount was dedicated beside every churchyard to receive the souls till their adjacent bodies arise, and so become as a fairy hill, they using bodies of air when called abroad. They also affirm those creatures that more move invisibly in a house and cast huge great stones, but do not much hurt because counterwrought by some courteous or charitable spirits that are everywhere readily to defend men, to be souls that have not attained their rest through a vehement desire of revealing a murder or notable injury done or received, or a treasure that was forgot in their lifetime on earth, which when disclosed to a conjurer alone, a ghost quite removes. The ghost quite removes. In the next country to that of my former residence, about the year 1676, when there was some scarcity of grain, a marvelous elapse and vision strongly struck the imagination of two women in one night, living at a good distance from one another, about a treasure hid in a hill called Sithburiac or Fairy Hill. The appearance of the treasure was first represented to the fancy, and then an audible voice named the place where it was to their awakening senses. Whereupon both arose, and meeting accidentally at the place, discovered their design, and jointly digging, found a vessel as large as a Scottish peck, full of small pieces of good money, of ancient coin, which having betwixt them they sold in dishfuls for dishfuls of meal to the country people. Very many of undoubted credit saw and had the coin to this day, but whether it was a good or bad angel, one of the subterranean people, or the restless soul of him who hid it, that discovered it, and to what end it was done, I leave to the examination of the others. These subterraneans have controversies, doubts, disputes, feuds, and siding of parties, there being some ignorance in all creatures and the vastest created intelligences not encompassing all things. As to vice and sin, whatever their own laws be, sure according to ours, and equity natural, civil, and revealed, they transgress and commit acts of injustice, and sin by what is above said as to their stealings of nurses to their children, and that other sort of Pelagianism in catching our children away, may seem to heir some estate in those invisible dominions which never return. For their for the inconvenience of their succubae who tries with men is abominable, but for swearing and intemperance they are not observed, so subject to those irregularities as to envy, spite, hypocrisy, lying, and dissimulation. Sorry about that. As our religion obliges us not to make a premonitory and curious search into these abstrusenesses, so that the histories of all ages give as many plain examples of extraordinary occurrences as make a modest inquiry not contemptible. How much is written of pygmies, fairies, nymphs, sirens, apparitions, which though not the tenth part true, yet could not spring of nothing? How much is written of pygmies, fairies, nymphs, sirens, apparitions, which though not the tenth part true, yet could not spring of nothing? Even English authors relate of Berry Island in Glamorganshire, that laying your ear into a cleft of the rocks, blowing of bellows, striking of hammers, clashing of armor, filing of irons, will be heard distinctly ever since Merlin enchanted those subterranean wights to a solid manual forging of arms to Aurelius Ambrosius and his Britons till he returned, which Merlin being killed in a battle and not coming to loose the knot, these active Vulcans are there tied to a perpetual labor. But to dip no deeper into this well, I will next gives some account how the seer, my informer, comes to have this secret way of corresponding beyond other mortals. There be odd solemnities at investing a man with the privileges of the whole mystery of the second sight. He must run a tether of hair, which bound a corpse to the bier, in a helix about his middle from end to end, then bow his head downwards as did Elijah, 1 Kings 18:42, and look back through his legs until he see a funeral advance, till the people cross two marches, or look thus back through a hole where a, where was a knot of fir. But if the wind change points while the hair tether is tied about him, he is in peril of his life. The usual method for a curious person to get a transient sight of this otherwise invisible crew of subterraneans, if impolitely and over rashly sought, is to put his left foot under the wizard's right foot, and the seer's hand is to put the inquirer's head, who is to look over the wizard's right shoulder, which has an ill appearance as if, by this ceremony, an implicit surrender were made of all betwixt the wizard's foot and his hand ere the person can be admitted a privado to the art. Then will he see a multitude of wights like furious hardy men flocking to him hastily from all quarters as thick as atoms in air, which are no non-entities or phantasms, creatures proceeding from an affrighted apprehension, confused or crazed sense, but realities, appearing to a stable man in his awakening sense, and enduring a rational trail of their being. That's super interesting. Those through fear strike him breathless and speechless. The wizard, defending the lawfulness of his skill, forbids such horror and comforts his novice by telling of Zacharias as being struck speechless at seeing apparitions. Luke 1:20. Then he further maintains his art by vouching Elisha to have had the same and disclosed it thus unto his servant in 2 Kings 6:17, when he blinded the Syrians, and Peter in Acts 5:9, foreseeing the death of Sapphira by perceiving as it were her winding sheet about her beforehand, and Paul in 2 Corinthians 12:4, who got such a vision and sight as should not nor could be told. Elisha also in his chamber saw Gehazi his servant at a great distance taking a reward from Naaman. 2 Kings 5:26. Hence were the prophets frequently called seers or men of second or more exalted sight than others. He acts for his purpose also Matthew 4:8, where the devil undertakes to give even Jesus a sight of all nations in their finest things in the world at one glance, though in their natural situations and stations at a vast distance from another. And 'tis said expressly he did let see them, not in a map it seems, nor by a fantastic magical juggling of the sight, which he could not impose upon so discovering a person. It would appear then to have been a sight of real solid substances and things of worth, which he intended as a bait for his purpose, which it might seem, comparing this relation of Matthew 4:8 with the former, that the extraordinary or second sight can be given by the ministry of bad as well as good spirits to those that will embrace it. And the instance of Balaam and the Pythoness make it nothing the less probable. Thus also the seer trains his scholar by telling of the gradations of nature ordered by a wise providence, that as the sight of bats and owls transcend that of shrews and moles, so the visive faculties of man are clearer than those of owls, as eagles, lynxes, and cats are brighter than men's. And again, that men of the second sight, being designed to give warnings against secret engines, surpass the ordinary vision of other men, which is a native habit in some, descended from their ancestors, and acquired as an artificial improvement of their natural sight in others, resembling in their own kind the usual artificial helps of optic glasses, as perspectives, telescopes, and microscopes. Okay, I want to read that one more time. and acquired as an artificial improvement for their natural sight. Okay, surpass the ordinary vision of other men, which is a native habit in some, descended from their ancestors and acquired as an artificial improvement of their natural sight in others, resembling in their own kind the usual artificial helps of optic glasses, without which I need help, Yon God. I don't know what this word is. Adsitius aids? I don't know. The aids of glasses and telescopes and microscopes. Without those aids, those men here treated of do perceive things that for their smallness or subtlety and secrecy are invisible to others, though daily conversant with them. They having such a beam continually about them, as that of the sun, which when it shines clear only lets common eyes see the atoms in the air that without those rays they could not discern, for some have this second sight transmitted from father to son, through the whole family without their own consent or others' teaching, proceeding only from a bounty of providence, as it seems, or by compact or complexion quality of the first acquirer, as it may seem alike strange, yet nothing vicious, in such as Master Greatrake, the Irish stoker, seventh sons, and others that cure King's evil, disease of the lymph nodes. So the king's evil is in parentheses, disease of the lymph nodes, and chase away diseases and pains with only stroking of the affected part, which, if it be not the relics of miraculous operations or some secret virtue in the womb of the parent, which increaseth until the seventh son be born and decreases by the same degrees afterwards, proceeds only from the sanative balsam of their healthful constitutions, virtue going out from them by spirituous effluxes unto the patient, and their vigorously healthy spirits affecting the sick, as usually the unhealthy fumes of the sick infect the sound and whole. The minor sort of seers prognosticate many future events only for a month's space, from the shoulder bone of a sheep on which a knife never came. For as before is said, and the Nazarites of old had something of it, iron hinders all the operations of those that travail in the intrigues of these hidden dominions. By looking into the bone, they will tell if a whoredom be committed in the owner's house, what money the master of the sheep had, if any will die out of that house for that month, and if any cattle there will take a trach, as if planet struck. Then they will prescribe a preservative and prevention. Will take a trach as a planet struck. A woman, it seems an exception from the general rule, singularly wise in these matters of foresight, living in Colosnach, an isle of the Hebrides, in the time of Marquess of Montrose, his wars with the states in Scotland. Being notorious among many, so this woman, singularly wise in matters of the foresight, being notorious among many, and so examined by some that violently seized that isle, if she saw them coming or not, she said she saw them coming many hours before they came in view of the isle, but earnestly looking, she sometimes took them for enemies, sometimes for friends, and moreover they looked as if they went from the isle, not as men approaching it, which made her not put the inhabitants on their guard. The matter was that the barge wherein the enemy sailed was a little before taken from the inhabitants of that same isle, and the men had their back towards the isle when they were plying the oars toward it. Thus this old scout and Delphian oracle was at last deceived and did deceive. Being asked who gave her such sights and warnings, she said that as soon as she set 3 crosses of straw upon the palm of her hand, a great ugly beast sprang out of the earth near her and flew in the air. If what she inquired had success according to her wish, the beast would descend calmly and lick up the crosses. If it would not succeed, The beast would furiously thrust her and the crosses over on the ground and so vanish to his place. Among other instances of undoubted variety proving in these of in these the being of such aerial people or species of creature not vulgar, vulgarly known, I add the subsequent relations, some whereof I have from my acquaintance with the actors and patients and the rest of the eyewitnesses to the matter of fact. The first whereof shall be of a woman taken out of her childbed and having a lingering image of her substituted body in her room, which, which resemblance decayed, died, and was buried. But the person stolen, returning to her husband after 2 years' space, and being convinced by many undeniable tokens that she was his former wife, admitted her home and had divers children by her. Crazy. Among other reports she gave her husband, this was one, that she perceived little what they did in the spacious house she lodged in until she anointed one of her eyes with a certain unction that was by her, which they perceiving to have acquainted her with their actions, they fanned her blind of that eye with a puff of their breath. She found the place full of light, without any fountain or lamp from whence it did spring. This person lived in the country next to that of my last residence and might furnish matter of dispute amongst casuists, I think casuists, if amongst casuists, whether if her husband had been married in the interim of her 2 years' absence, he was obliged to divorce from the second spouse at the return of the first. There is an art appearingly without superstition for recovering of such as are stolen, but think it superfluous to insert it. I saw a woman of 40 years of age and examined her, having another clergyman in my company, about a report that passed of her long fasting. Her name is not entire. It was told by them of the house, as well as herself, that she took very little or no food for several days past, that she tarried in the fields overnight, saw and conversed with a people she knew not, having wandered in seeking of her sheep, and slept upon a hillock, and finding herself transported to another place before day. The woman had a child since that time, and is still pretty melancholious and silent, hardly ever seen to laugh. Her natural heat and radical moisture seem to be equally balanced, like an unextinguished lamp, and going in a circle, not unlike to the faint life of bees and some sort of birds that sleep all winter over and revive in the spring. It is usual in all magical arts to have the candidates prepossessed with a belief of their tutor's skill and ability to perform their feats and act their juggling pranks and legerdemain. But a person called Stewart, possessed with a prejudice at that was spoken of the second sight, and living near to my house, was so put to it by a seer before many witnesses that he lost his speech and power of his legs, and breathing excessively as if expiring, because of the many fearful whites that appeared to him. The company were forced to carry him into the house. It is notoriously known that in Killen within Perthshire fell tragically out with a yeoman that lived hard by, who coming into company with an alehouse where a seer sat at table, that at the sight of the entrant neighbor, the seer, starting, rose to go out of the house, and being asked the reason of his haste, told that the entrant man should die within 2 days, at which news the named entrant stabbed the seer and was himself executed 2 days after the fact. A minister, very intelligent, but misbelieving in all such sights as were not ordinary, chancing to be in a narrow lane with a seer, who, perceiving a wight of a known visage, furiously to encounter them, the seer desired the minister to turn out of the way, who, scorning his reason and holding himself in the path with them, When the seer was going hastily out of the way, they both violently cast aside to a good distance, and the fall made them lame for all their life. A little after the minister was carried home, one came to toll the bell for the death of the man whose representation met them in the narrow path some half an hour before. Another example is a seer in Kintyre in Scotland, sitting at a table with divers others, suddenly did cast his head aside. The company asked him why he did it. He answered that such a friend of his, by the name, then in Ireland, threatened immediately to cast a dishful of butter in his face. The men wrote down the day and hour and sent to the gentleman to know the truth, which deed the gentleman declared he did at that very time, for he knew that his friend was a seer and would make sport with it. The men that were present and examined the matter exactly told me this story, and withal that the seer would, with all his optics, perceive no other object so readily as this at such a distance. Okay, I'll stop there. The next part says, a succinct account of my Lord Tarbet's relations in a letter to Honorable Robert Boyle, Esquire, of the predictions made by seers. I don't know. That's kind of long, but I got a lot highlighted, so it might be interesting. But I'm gonna stop there and end this. Oh wait, oh God, there we go. That's that word I can pronounce.